Have you ever given a pupil a piece of feedback, hoping that they will take this on board and use it to improve and make progress, only to find that when you come to mark their next piece of work, it has little or no effect? So we know how valuable feedback can be for pupils, but it has to be useful to be effective. So what does effective feedback actually look like? Well, my guest today, Katherine Muncaster, explains what effective feedback can look like and how feedback can take many forms. So Katherine herself has so much experience in the education sector. She's a head teacher, she's an education consultant, and she's also the author of 3 books. So Katherine had so much to share, we should just get to the interview, to be honest. So Katherine, welcome so much to the Teachers Podcast today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So we're going to talk about feedback today. So I know teachers will have heard the term feedback before, but can you sum up what you mean by effective feedback for our listeners?
I think effective feedback is a process that is relevant to learning in the classroom, and it's really vital that we have effective feedback. And feedback comes in a variety of forms. It can be teacher to child, it can be peer to peer, and it can be child to teacher. And all of this is really, really powerful when it's used effectively across the whole of schools and everyone's classrooms, and it can enable children to really make accelerated progress in their learning.
Oh, fantastic. So just one thing that I'm just thinking about now, do you ever have like feedback teacher to teacher as well then?
Yes, so we do that as well, and we do peer-to-peer observations amongst our staff colleagues as well, which I think is really important. But it's more of a dialogue about learning. I think that's something I'm really passionate about, that we're actually talking about learning and our impact on our own learning as staff and also on our children's learning.
So is it then more about, because feedback is a scary term, isn't it? Feedback, I think, can mean like what you've done wrong. Whereas I think, so at director level at Classroom Secrets, we talk about feedback a lot, and we give each other, I suppose, a kind of feedback that we're used to that maybe some people wouldn't be used to, where it's more about, okay, here are the next steps that you can work through, but it's okay because we all kind of have our failings. Is that kind of the angle you're more coming at?
I think it's really important to have an effective learning culture in your classroom and in your school, and I think that's part of it, that having that learning culture which supports effective feedback, where it's okay, it normalises mistakes, they're seen as part of the learning process, that children see that, they identify and they bounce on from that, from the feedback. They can even identify where they've gone wrong in the learning process, because that's really powerful through the feedback they give, and that moves us on as learners, doesn't it? And I think that culture of every child a learner and every member of staff as a learner enables schools to be the most effective, really.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? And that's not necessarily the culture in all schools, where it's normalising mistakes for adults. And it's really important because nobody's perfect, are they?
No, and also we're going to get better by making those mistakes and learning from them, aren't we? And I think that's the key. There's a lot of research into the different types of mistakes we can make. We could talk about that a lot, perhaps another time. But one of the things is how we move on from that, how we learn from that, and how we utilise that. And that's something we need to empower our children to do. And also we need to provide learning opportunities within our classroom for them to do that as well.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, even just from I'm thinking about my 5-year-old right now, like I would love for her to learn from her mistakes, please, because it saves me time, it makes my life easier. So, it's not just about learning for yourself, is it? It's learning as part of the collective and what you're involved in the community, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think having that collaborative culture in the classroom where everyone supports each other when they do make mistakes is really vital for that. Both the teacher modelling their own mistakes and supporting that way, and also the children acknowledging when they do make mistakes. I think sometimes in our classrooms there's a myth, isn't there, about the clever child that doesn't work hard and just is able to do everything in life. And that's not true. We all have to work hard. We all have to overcome setbacks and failures. And I think it's getting that culture through effective feedback that's vital.
Also, not just that, it's interesting, I want to pick up on what you said, like the clever child who doesn't have to work hard. One of the observations that I've had recently is that child may need feedback in other areas like creativity, and it's not always about just being able to boss your maths and your English test, is it, at the end of the day?
No, I think there's the myth of the classroom that children often perceive somebody to be clever. And I don't like the word clever particularly. I think we're all about our attainment and our learning journey. And your attainment varies, doesn't it, depending on what you're doing the day of the week and how you're feeling, what subject it is. But the more that we rise to challenges and we see that we have to put hard work and effort in, and we dispel those myths that actually we're just born clever, because we're not. We actually have to all work hard. And everybody can always identify how they can develop and improve if they're given the tools to do that with.
Yeah. Oh, I love this conversation. So why is then ensuring that feedback is effective so important in the classroom?
I think it's the accessibility and the dialogue of the children and the teacher to child to child, child back to teacher is really illuminating. I remember a number of years ago when I was teaching in year 2, which is where I spent most of my teaching career, we had in their maths books little bubbles where children could record how they'd work things out, and a child had written the strategy she'd used for the first one. I thought, great, when I was looking at her book. Second one, she'd done the same, and in the third one she wrote, I copied Kathy's. Now that's an illuminating feedback, isn't it? Because just looking at the sums and the questions, you'd have thought she was right. She could do that. She was able to acquire that knowledge and skills, but actually she wasn't. And the most powerful thing about that story is that she was confident enough to be honest and say what she'd actually done and record that. And that sort of got me thinking more and more about how important it is, the feedback, because you can look at books and you can look at marking and it tells you something, but actually those conversations and those dialogues or those instant signs that we can use to give feedback in the classroom are far more powerful.
Yeah. And I think that this is a really valuable conversation. It's about being able to translate that into something else, isn't it? So having less emphasis on getting it right and more emphasis on doing it differently. Something that happened a couple of months ago, actually. There were 2 children who were asked to create a bridge that I was working with, and this was out of Lego. One of the children just went to town on it. It took them maybe 20 minutes and they were doing all sorts of things. The other child brought 7 bridges, and the child was very clever, even though we don't like that term. And every time it was like, could you add this, could you add that? Because I could see it was a good reflection piece for me. I could see for them, they were very clear on the steps they needed to take, possibly in maths, possibly in English, possibly in this particular situation, to get, yes, well done, rather than stepping back and thinking about what they could make it and how they could put themselves into it. And I think, really interesting. So one child was able to use the feedback. The other one didn't necessarily know what to do with the feedback because it didn't really get any better. There were just 7 simple bridges, if that makes sense. So that's another demonstration, isn't it, that feedback is so important, but it's about the confidence to be able to use it.
It is, and it's providing those learning opportunities where we're actually being made to think differently as children, isn't it, and as adults at times, and then responding and bouncing back from that feedback and being able to channel that and take it and move it on, which is a life skill that even adults find quite difficult, don't they, at times.
Yeah, well, I think, to be fair, it feels like an adult skill. If I look around at adults in my life, there are some adults that probably haven't built that skill. And one thing that I always think about it is it reminds me of when I was a child. So even as a teenager, I didn't have these skills. So if we can make sure that children have them earlier on and feel confident in that, then I think a lot is possible, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's really important as part of our hidden curriculum that we teach children explicitly the skills of how to be an effective learner, and feedback is one key element of that.
So why are you so passionate then about making sure that pupils do receive effective feedback and then feel empowered by giving feedback themselves?
I think it goes back to this. I have this philosophy of every child as a learner, and I think that's really important. I think, my early education, I was dyslexic, that wasn't identified in the 80s and 90s. You got more spellings, it didn't really help, but no one could sort of identify that and see that. And the more we talk to our children and the more we listen to our children, we can see where the difficulties are with the learning, we can support them and we can help them effectively. And also we can change what we're doing to enable them to do better as well. And I think that's really important, that we reflect on our own practice. Whatever stage we are in our career as a teacher, we can always reflect differently on it and think about that. And I think that's where it comes from. And I want to encourage all children and adults to keep learning and to keep that idea of how I can develop this, how I can improve that.
I think as well, it's not just about feedback, is it? I feel like there's an underlying word here that we should use, and it's about safety. Feeling safe to say the things that are inside, that maybe you need to get out in order to move on. And I think that's probably one of the barriers, particularly in schools and for adults, of that feeling of safety. Everybody's watching.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's when your culture comes along. And I think the teachers have got a real key role to play in that in the classroom, in how they normalise things and how it becomes acceptable, partly by modelling their own experiences, talking about the mistakes they've made, and also by normalising mistakes, and the feedback they give does that. It shows the children that it's okay, because we can bounce on from this and we can learn from it. And I think that shared language is really crucial in the classroom.
So then, if you're a teacher listening now, what 3 actionable steps can you share to help them, develop their feedback in their classrooms, basically?
Well, the first thing I always say when I'm doing training is to go back and ask your class, what do they think effective feedback is? Because we talk a lot as teachers about the things that we know help us to be more effective in the classroom, but looking at the level of understanding of our children, whatever their age, is really important, because there are often misconceptions about these things. So what do they think effective feedback is? And I always start a good class discussion, because I'm always really interested in hearing the children's thoughts on that. You may then want to scaffold that and give them some definitions to stimulate the discussion, to see what they come with. It's quite illuminating what they see feedback is as well, and it will also give you some ideas of how you do feedback in your classroom. Because whatever feedback we get, we've got to use that. And I think that's really important. I think one of the things, especially we've been talking a lot as a staff team, but I was talking to some teachers in Wales about this recently, is one of the things we found following on from COVID is we really need high quality, effective feedback on learning starting points. Where are our children at? So there's a really nice thing. We use a traffic light in school, and you can use it from reception all the way up to year 6. And so whatever your focus is, you can ask the children. So if it was with younger children, names of foods, or they could sort them into foods they recognise, which would be green. Amber would be unsure but thought they might know, and red would be ones they didn't know. And straight away you've got very powerful assessment for learning from that feedback, and you can take that and modify your teaching. You can do the same for who understands what greater and more means in maths. You could do the same for facts about history, and so activities like that are really, really important at the moment. And then there's a very powerful question that I like to ask, and all the work I've written, we've always asked the children this, and it's, how did I help you learn in that lesson? And I think that's really, really powerful. At the end of a lesson, you've got to be quite brave to do this, because children can be quite brutal with their feedback, as we know. So how did I help you learn in that lesson, and what could I do to help you even more? And just 2 very simple questions. When we start opening ourselves up to feedback, and often it's quite illuminating, we then help to them to see the power of it, because if they can give us feedback and it can help improve their learning experience, they will then take on feedback more and more. And I think that's really important.
That's really good. Just a question then. Sometimes I do ask my children for feedback, as well, obviously asking my colleagues. How long do you find that it takes? I suppose it might be an age thing as well, because obviously I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old just tells me she doesn't like my hair. But how long do you find it takes for them to really sort of grasp, not telling the truth, but sometimes I feel at the beginning they just say something because they don't know what to say. How long do you find it takes where they really understand what it is you're asking and say something valuable?
I think there's two things there. It's how you respond to the feedback. So if someone gives you something that's useful, whatever that may be, if you then thank them and say, thank you for that feedback, that's really helpful, that will help me improve because I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, following on from your feedback. When they see you doing that, then they say, actually, what I'm saying is valued, and she's moving on from that and using it. I think the other thing is, it's similar to if we've got talk partners set up in our classroom. When we have talk partners set up, we have them and we want them to be really effective. We have success criteria, we reinforce that. We need to have that in place for feedback. And to start with, it's simple things. In one of the activities in the Metacognition book I wrote, we've got ideas where you sort different types of feedback into whether it's good quality or bad or not as powerful feedback. And we look at that and the order in terms of which is the most powerful feedback, and giving relevant examples of that for the children's age, I think is something really good to do. Stimulates discussion, and it's explicitly modelling it, and I think that's the key. If we want children to be effective learners and to understand the process of learning, modelling is key in all of this.
So basically buy the book.
No.
I'll add that to my list because that'll be really interesting. So thank you so much. Where can we find out more about you, plus the books you've written?
I'm on Twitter. I've not been doing much tweeting. I must get back to it. I'm on Twitter. Every child, I think it is, or something like that. And then I've got a website, www.everychildalearner.com. So there's lots of free resources and things like that, and I'm always really interested in getting feedback from people. I've had some really interesting feedback that's made me think over the last few years and helped develop my practice, and I think that's really important. And it's just lovely, isn't it, working with teachers, because it's the best job in the world.
Yeah. And what are the names of the books you've written?
There's a book on developing growth mindset across school, which is all about your learning culture, and that's called Every Child a Learner, Growth Mindset, Every Child a Learner. And then there's Thinking Classrooms, which is the book about metacognition, where we explore practical strategies to get the children using some of these learning skills that we're talking about. And I'm just writing another one on resilience at the moment and mental toughness, which is out next year. So
I can see what you like to do as a hobby.
Yeah, there's something magical about it, and I think one of my superpowers, being dyslexic, is the idea of taking things and concepts and making them accessible for children, and I think that's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful conversation, and I'm like, right, I need to go buy that book now.
Thanks, Claire. It's been lovely talking to you too.